Our next speaker is Martyn, and I'm not going to say his last name because I'm not certain. I should have checked that. Iles. It is Iles. Now, Martyn is the Managing Director of the Australian Christian Lobby, which desires compassionate, just and moral society through having Christian faith reflected in the political life of the nation. Now, Martyn's done quite a few things as well. So he's formerly the founding director of the Human Rights Law Alliance, which is an organisation that seeks to protect religious freedom through legal advocacy. These are the guys that when you see a big case that gets in the news, they'll see that as a strategic one and go and actually offer to help, which is actually quite important, winning those legal cases. Now, Martyn's also been Chief of Staff of the Australian Christian Lobby and worked in a top-tier commercial law firm and also established an IT business. He is a dedicated Christian and been involved with youth ministry as well, with disadvantaged teens for quite some time. And I would like to welcome him. Thank you very much, Martyn.
Well, thanks, Stuart, and thanks, Dave and Sophie, for riveting speeches. It's now my job to keep you all going for a little longer for the home straight. So wish me luck. It's my pleasure to be here. I came up recently for an event in Port Stephens, and Stuart and Fiona and others, yeah, these guys must have been there, and others, they at the last minute pulled together a bunch of supporters here in Newcastle for me to speak to, and so I agreed to come back with a bigger group like we have today, and it really is great to see you all. I want to endorse the objectives of the group, Christians in Politics. I'm really pleased about the way that's been articulated and expressed because, you know, Christianity isn't politics, but Christianity has a lot to say to politics. And the problem we have today is there are those that would tell us that we have no business bringing our faith into the political arena, that God has no business saying anything to secular government. That the Word of God can't shape secular government, and that we as Christians can't, as people of faith, speak into secular government. And that language of secular government is very powerful. But you know, when I go back to the Bible and I look at some first principles of how we should engage and how we should think about these things, it strikes me that it says there that governing authority itself is ordained by God. Romans 13. Governing authority, it says also in Romans 13, is what God has appointed. Governing authority is that which has been instituted by God. 3 quotes from one verse, Romans 13, verse 1. And so they say, well, God has no business in secular government. Well, unfortunately, he created secular government. It's part of his system, and they are exercising authority that actually belongs to God himself. And that's a significant point. When you read these scriptures like 1 Peter 2, Romans 13 and other places, it's not the government system that's ordained of God, democracy, monarchy, whatever it may be. It's not necessarily the individuals that are ordained of God. It is more about the fact that the authority itself is God's authority. Remember when Jesus spoke to Pilate, and Pilate asked him a question and he said, "You would have no authority at all unless it had been given to you from above." So governing authority is a thing that God has ordained himself. Governing authority is a thing that God gives to some in this world. But you know, when that governing authority is given to somebody, it carries with it a very significant set of obligations. Actually, it's quite a frightening set of obligations, and one which those who seek offices that carry governing authority must take to heart. In Romans 13, very powerful words are used about this obligation. It says that these people are servants of God and they are ministers of God. They are conducting a service and a ministry in this world, holding God's authority on trust to use for him in their office of government. That's no small thing. And you know, people say, well, What then really is the role of government? What does God want them to do? What is it to which God calls people with governing authority? How is it that God would have his authority used from this office? And the answer given to us in the Bible is it's so simple. It's so simple. I was told when I was younger by a wise man, he said to me, the best way to understand something is not to throw yourself at it and try and learn as much as you possibly can about it in the first place. He said the best way to understand something is to grasp the organising principle that lies behind it, because then you'll be equipped to really figure out how it works. And if you try and learn as much as you can about governing authority, you'll be working away for a long time. I come from Canberra, which is an entire city built for government. There's whole suburbs which are just government departments. There are thousands and thousands of public servants who have some measure of governing authority. There is a federal parliament, a senate and a house. There's the federal court system. There's the high court. There's the federal magistrates court. And then you've got, also the legislative assembly for the ACT. But you've got state upper and lower houses around the country as well, except Queensland, because it's awesome. I'm a Queenslander, which just has a lower house. And then you have courts. In New South Wales, no one laughs when I say that. In every other state, people laugh. It's just an observation. You go around the nation, and there is a monstrous beast that travels under the umbrella of governing authority. What's it all for? Do you know the organising principle that lies behind it is so simple? So simple. Paul says, ministers as sent by God for what? To punish those who do evil and reward those who do good. 1 Peter 2, exactly the same thing is said. Governors as sent by God to punish evil and reward good. It is a ministry of righteousness. Solomon, a wise man involved in the business of government, said righteousness exalts a nation. Proverbs 14. That's the job that they're charged to do, restrain evil in the world. And governing policy is a very powerful way to do that. And it's one of the means by which God has ordained for that to be achieved. And governments can't easily get away from this reality that the kind of authority they have is an authority to declare what is evil and what is good. Because do you know what a law is in the English common law system that we have in Australia? Look up Sir William Blackstone from the 1600s, the father of the common law, and he says a law is a rule of right conduct. It tells us what is right and what is wrong. And it is law-making power that the governing authorities carry today. They can't escape from the fact that that's the way God has made it. They can't escape from the fact that God actually would have them to exercise a ministry of righteousness, to restrain evil and reward good in this world. And laws should reflect God's moral righteousness. When I was a kid, I memorised all the biographies of the kings in the Old Testament. I don't know why, but I did. And in the process, I learned quite a lot. And one of the things that I learned was, amongst all of the kings from Saul to Zedekiah, through Israel and Judah, many of them had politically complicated reigns. Many of them had wars and treaties and all sorts of things going on. Some of them were around for 55 years in the case of Manasseh, 52 years in the case of Uzziah. They were around for long periods of time. But it's interesting to me that after such a rich and such a long-winded and such a complex reign, no matter who it was, every single one is summarised with one phrase. They always say he did that which was right in the sight of God, or he did that which was evil in the sight of God. And that's what mattered in the final analysis. And that's what God sought from governing authority. It hasn't changed, Old Testament, New Testament. He still seeks the same thing. Now, do you know, I want to ask this question when it comes to the issue of Christians in politics. If Christians are not going to be ministers of God, who is? If Christians are not going to be servants of God, who is? If Christians are not going to get up and make laws that reflect what is actually right and what is actually wrong, who is? Because, we live in a time when these things are changing rapidly. We've talked a little with Sophie's talk in particular about the Judeo-Christian heritage upon which we're built. And there's so much about that did the job that God would have governments to do, which is restrain evil, which was put in place laws that reflect the truth of what is right and what is wrong. But there's radical changes to that, and David started to bring that before us with the abortion discussion. All of a sudden, what's right and what's wrong in the abortion situation in Queensland? It's not what God says is right and wrong. There is what is a moral inversion taking place, where, like it says in Isaiah 5:20, we call good evil and evil good. There's a reversal. Do you know, that is significant because you have to ask yourself the question, when does government fail? And ultimately, if we take the biblical imperatives here, government fails when it loses the thing which is essential to its function. And the thing that's essential to its function is a moral compass, a knowledge of right and wrong. And if you lose that knowledge, which is what we're seeing today, and I've been at ACL since August 2014 in the legal side with the legal clinic we started, which Stuart referenced, and also the policy side with the politics and the lobbying. And it's as if we've boarded this train that's sort of left a station, that's roughly Romans 13-ish, that sort of roughly says there's a moral compass here that we adhere to, that we agree on, that laws reflect. And we're moving towards this Isaiah 5:20 station where it says, woe to those who call good evil and evil good, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. Do you know, not only do we know what governing authority is for, and not only do we understand what is the moral mandate for government that God has ordained as Christians, not only are we those who can be ministers of God and servants of God, in the best possible way, we hope. And not only are we able to take the prophetic role to call government back to that standard, as the prophets always did, in the New Testament as well. Remember, John the Baptist called out Herod for his sin. Paul was told that he would stand before kings and speak. They took those opportunities. Not only can we do all of those things, but also we can recognise when society is starting to change. There's a great quote from a priest which roughly says, Christians above all people know when society is going bad because they have an absolute reference point by which to measure all things. And I think sometimes we need to look at these signs that are before us and we need to take action. And one of the signs that's before us is the erosion of freedom of religion. And the erosion of freedom of religion is very serious. I said we started this legal clinic in 2016, May. We've had roughly 50 cases of a religious freedom nature since that time. We were in the High Court of Australia 3 weeks ago. And we're in the High Court of Australia, which is not many cases get there. It's just quite a remarkable thing. And we were there because of the case of a lady called Kathy Clubb. Some of you may have heard of her, but what Kathy has done is she has stood on sidewalks in Melbourne and she's made simple offers of help to women who are approaching abortion clinics for some years. And as a result of simply doing that, as she works with a group of others who do the same, and they call themselves the helpers, she has seen more than 300 babies born alive and their mothers helped. Absolutely. I mean, I'd never heard of Kathy. I'd never heard of the helpers. I thought sidewalk counsellors were strange people because that's what the media tells us. And then you find out the truth of what they're doing. And then you find out that the politicians that introduced these laws called bubble zones that create a 150-metre exclusion zone around abortion clinics know full well that the only people that they are going to stop is the Cathys of this world. They know there isn't harassment. They know there isn't obstruction. They know that there's been very little bad behaviour over a course of decades. But they're bringing in the law. Fiona Patten, a member of the Sex Party in the upper house of Victoria, I know it's Victoria, Victoria, dear me. But I tell you, the rest of the nation's not far behind. The toxic fumes are belching over the border at an alarming rate. But Fiona Patten knew that this bill would stop Kathy, and that's why she introduced it. And of course, the bill passed. And what did Kathy do? She went and she stood on the sidewalk and she did what she's always done. A couple were walking in and she just simply handed a piece of paper. And the piece of paper would have said something on it to the effect of, I can help or whatever. And Kathy was arrested by 8 police officers. There's a crime wave in Melbourne. We've all heard about it. But this is the crime wave you hadn't heard about. And the police resources were well deployed. And she was criminally charged with communicating about abortion in a way that can be seen or heard within 150 metres of a clinic. And she was convicted at the Melbourne Magistrates Court. She got a $10,000 fine, I think, and she had community service elements to that as well. Good behaviour bond. We appealed and it went straight to the High Court. And every single Attorney General in the nation, Commonwealth and state, was against her. That was heard 3 weeks ago. Us with our ragtag legal team and some amazing guys who offered assistance under miraculous circumstances, some really top barristers. That was us. But you know what? The other side was sort of all the king's horses and all the king's men lined up against Kathy. Why? Because she did the right thing. It's as simple as that. Here is a law that says that what is good is evil and what is evil is good. There's no other way around it. And Kathy's case is one of 55 or 53 that we've actually been involved in. And it's not just Melbourne, they're all over. We've had them in all states. Patricia Wirracoon is a woman who some of you may have heard of. And Patricia writes these books and speaks on gender and sexuality issues. She's a medical practitioner by background. One of the very few people going into schools and unpicking the confusion on this stuff. But she gives a talk in a Christian school, which actually contains the gospel in the talk for the kids. And deals with these issues in a delicate way, but a way that is true. And an activist sees that talk online and starts stalking her. She's stalked for a number of months until finally she's assaulted in the shops over the road from her house. And she calls in a state of distress because the police were being a bit unhelpful. But the other thing that this guy did was he reported her to the University of Sydney, where she had an affiliated status, and he reported her to a professional body with which she had an accreditation, saying this woman is unfit for status with the university and is unfit for accreditation. She lost the accreditation. We couldn't save it. And she was drummed out of that particular body. The university, we got substantial legal support. Actually, a former judge showed up at her conciliation hearing, and we saved it. But the message to her was, don't do it again. Now, Patricia, of course, has done the right thing, and she's continued to do it because she's great that way, and she's fearless, and she says, well, I'm 70, I should be retired, but I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. And she will not stop. No offence to 70-year-olds in the room, by the way. That's what she said to me. That's not what I said to her. But, Patricia is doing a great thing. But, that is now the cost of using your gifts and talents for God. We have had a lot of people who have lost accreditations or had their accreditations challenged, particularly doctors and medical professionals, because they have spoken up for the truth. We have people who have been fired from their jobs, who've been put under disciplinary investigation. Simply, one guy posted on his own, the corporate intranet, the internal forum, saying that he was going to vote no for same-sex marriage in response to about 10 others who said they were going to vote yes. And he had his post deleted, and he was told that he had to come in for a disciplinary meeting to discuss what should be done up to and including dismissal. That kind of thing is very common, particularly in big law firms like where I used to work. In fact, the one I used to work for is one of the worst. They might sue me now for defamation. But also in the professional world with accreditation bodies. But we had a case just recently out of Perth, a photographer. People in Sydney don't know that Perth exists, but I think that Newcastle will understand. But over in that faraway place called Perth, this photographer had a couple come to him and asked to take photographs of her family. He quickly discerned that it was a lesbian family, 2 women with children. And he actually said to her, he said, look, this is something that I am willing to do, but I feel like in the interest of full disclosure, so that you can choose the best photographer for your family, because personally I try and get all in on the story of my clients. I'm an artist and I really commit myself to their cause. And I am a Christian, so it's going to be harder for me in this particular case, and explained his beliefs, and I read the message and I couldn't have written it better myself. And so this is for your choice. If you'd like to use me, that is not a problem, but I feel I had to tell you. And she turned around and sued him. And they went to the Equal Opportunity Commission over there for a conciliation hearing, as they do first. The Commissioner said this is a clear case of discrimination and referred it to the tribunal, which is appealable to the Supreme Court. So that guy, what did he actually do? All he did was say what he believed. That's all he did. He didn't decline service, he did nothing else, but they are actually mounting a very serious case against him. We have another case over in Perth again, and this is a case of foster parents, where they applied to become foster parents of children under the age of 6. They passed every test with flying colours. I read the documentation. They really did well. There wasn't a black mark against their name. They had a wonderful relationship with the agency until right at the end, when they thought they were finished, the agency called them back in to do another workshop. And it was a SOGI workshop, S-O-G-I, sexual orientation, gender identity. And they had to declare all of their beliefs about homosexuality, human sexual behaviours, and this kind of thing, and how they'd treat a child and blah, blah, blah. And they walked this line of sort of conviction and compassion. I thought they did it pretty well. They filled that form out. 2 days later, they got a notice in the mail saying it would be unsafe for us to place children in your care. Now, this is children under the age of 6. And they were sitting there saying the whole time, well, what relevance does this have, sort of thing? But there you are. And this kind of thing, we had a guy fired from his job as a general manager of a digital services agency when a staff member challenged him over his faith and what he believed about safe schools in particular, and he explained what he believed, and he was sacked, and he was told in the reasons for his sacking that he created an unsafe workplace. All of these are cases of people who are being punished for doing good. Nobody here has done the wrong thing. But do you think you can defend these people in the public square? Do you think the media care about these people? Do you think the attorneys general of the various states and territories and the nation do anything to support these people? No. Because there's a fundamental change that's taking place. I really believe that we are moving towards a moral inversion, which creates massive issues for Christians, but massive issues for the role of government. But it's interesting, that verse in Isaiah 5:20, it doesn't just stop at woe to those who call good evil and evil good. The next line is, and those who put darkness for light and light for darkness. It's interesting to me that that God takes the time to say both of those things. And usually there's a reason for that. And I think that there's something in this, which is that when evil is not restrained, there is something dreadful that comes forward that we see. There is a change that we can only call darkness. And I think that in the West, in the comforts of the modern West, in a nation like Australia that's lived on borrowed Judeo-Christian morality for a long time, we've forgotten something. We've forgotten something very important because we've had a comfortable life, and that is the true darkness of evil. That is what happens when evil ideologies get the ascendancy, and how much it costs, and how bad it is. And that's the only reason people can sit back and fold their arms. And they can say, oh, well, I found Christ, he's revealed himself to me, and, all these people that don't want him, and so, why would we impose our morality? So let's just sit back and let them go. You have no idea what you're saying. The cost of that, there's no love of neighbour in saying, I will not speak, for I will not impose morality. Because the cost of the alternative is very great, and we're starting to see it. You look at this gender theory business at the moment, it is really dark. You go to Victoria, where safe schools is being mandated in every government school, and we strongly believe all schools after the election, if Daniel Andrews is returned. And you see there how that kids, you look at the Project Rocket and the safe schools and the -18 websites, you look at what they're going in to tell kids. And they're saying things like, well, gender's like a galaxy. It can't be understood, but you can always explore. Or they say things like, by the way, this is another phrase, B-I, it's not a phase. And everything's sexualised. Everything's gender bending. Everything is about explore, test, try, experiment. And we have mothers in the main calling the ACL office in droves who have had their kids go through these programs. We had one ring just recently and said they went to my daughter's school, which is an all-girls school, and a week later there's 10 lesbian couples in year 10. What are they doing? Well, exactly what they were told. Explore, try, investigate. This is destroying lives. Absolutely destroying lives. There used to be a few presentations of gender dysphoria at the gender clinics in Victoria a year. There are now hundreds and thousands actually across the state going to clinics with gender dysphoria because they've had the idea put in their head. I used to do youth ministry, and I think, imagine if the kids that we were in charge of had this on their plate, in addition to all the other rubbish that they have to deal with in this world. This is evil. You read, it reminds me of a verse in the Bible. There's two verses actually. And the first one is one that tells us of the rhythm that we find in life, whereby, we make choices and we reap the consequences. And, when you see adults suffer for doing the wrong thing, it's tragic, it's sad, but there's a certain sense in it. You eat the fruit of your way, Proverbs says. But there's another dynamic, which is when the sins of the fathers are visited on the children. And that's a dynamic when they actually haven't done anything wrong. They've simply had the bad ideas, the evil ideas, and the sinful practices of another generation foisted upon them. And it's destroying lives. We will have so many refugees coming to the church in decades' time whose lives are irreparably destroyed because of this phenomenon. We had Walt Heyer in Sydney recently, one of the first ever gender reassignment patients in the world, who regretted it and transitioned back. Runs a transgender regret counselling ministry. Has counselled thousands of transgender people who want to go back. And he says, in fact, over a 3 to 15 year period, nearly all of them arrive in this place. Because he said, imagine, you don't feel like a real man. Are you going to feel like a real woman post-op? Come on. He says it doesn't work. That's why 40% of them commit suicide. And he says he sat down with these people who regret it, and he says the first question he asked is, what went wrong? And he said he is yet to have one person not answer that question straight out, or after a little while of thinking in that moment. Said more than 50% of cases, child sexual abuse. More than 50%. And paediatricians, if a child came in with gender dysphoria once upon a time, it was the first thing they look for. So we are papering over the deepest trauma with a name, which is transgender, and we're putting them on a pathway to 40% suicide. This is dark. It's really dark. This is why we cannot sit back and say, well, Christians have no place in policy and politics. Wash our hands. There's no love of neighbour. And in fact, God says in Isaiah 59, where he says justice is turned back, which is what we've seen, righteousness is lacking because truth has stumbled in the public squares. And he who departs from evil makes himself a prey. Now, all those cases I talked about are people made a prey for departing from evil, for doing the right thing. Justice is turning back because righteousness, the righteous role of government to restrain evil, is falling apart. It's not happening. There's an inversion going on. But the very next verse says, and God saw it, and it displeased him, and he marvelled that there was no one to intercede. And I say, God hates this, and he wants people to take a stand. He wants truth in the public square. And I say to people at ACL, may that never be said of our times as long as ACL's around. Might we continue to tell the truth in the public square, because from that flows these other things. Let me say, a lot of people hear the things that I've been talking about, and I sense this kind of lowering of the tone in the room because people are just grappling with the weight of some of the challenges we have, and there's some stuff that's a bit worse that I could tell you as well. But there is, it's not all doom and gloom. And it's not all doom and gloom because of the words of Jesus. Jesus actually thought about this well in advance. And when we hear this, I can sense that our mood is that we're down, we're low, we're distressed, we're concerned, we're fearful, and these things. But when Jesus thought about the prospect of hostility in the world against Christians and Christianity, when he thought about the prospect of persecution, which we're seeing more and more, when he thought about this, the first words on his lips were, blessed are the persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Such a difference of posture. And there's something in that, we think that our comforts are all we have. But he says, no, actually, yours is the kingdom of heaven. Great is your reward in heaven. That's not all you have, your comforts. There's something a lot greater that you're serving. And there's something far more real even than this present time, which is your destiny, which is where you're going, which is the kingdom you really belong to and the king who you truly serve. And I think that there's a promise there that not only is yours the kingdom of heaven in the sense that you'll get there, but actually something of heaven is brought forward in your experience now, because you trust God, you're closer to God, you know God. And what looks superficially scary is actually a means of great blessing in the moment. And you know what? Practically everyone who we've helped through the legal service would say that. You know, Josh, 20-year-old, who got nearly drummed out of uni for praying with a friend, says, best thing that ever happened to him. He's a brave guy, and he says, God actually showed me what my Christian faith was all about, and I'm glad that it happened. Paul and Silas sang songs in jail. I thought they were probably half mad once, but you know, I get it now, because this is a promise. It's not like you psych yourself up to it. God says it will come to you. It will happen. And there's something supernatural about it. You know, I work in the ACL office, which has been car bombed, which gets, routinely gets weird visitors showing up. We work behind bulletproof glass, and we've got shutters that come down. I had to move house when I took this job into a secure building where politicians and stuff live. All sorts of things. The Canberra Mail Centre gets shut down routinely because of white powder and all the rest of it that gets mailed through. Death threats come through to the office all the time. It's full on, and there's a real, it's not nice sometimes. But the ACL office is one of the happiest places I've been. And when I meet the other activists in Parliament, my goodness, they're miserable. They really are. They walk around like they've sucked on 100 lemons. And they're mad with the world. They're mad with us. I think they're just angry with God. And, they walk around with a little rainbow pin on, and they are absolutely dour and hopeless. And I sit there and think, what a contrast. Here we are saying, well, great is our reward in heaven, and we know it and we believe it. And actually God is ministering to us when we take a stand and do what is right. It's so important to know that. And not to be superficial about these things, like, oh, it's scary, it's going to be awful. Yeah, there is that element to it, but take heart and have hope. And let me just close, my time's just expired, but let me close with just a point. 2 points, actually, but they're kind of 1 point for these purposes. Jesus goes on to say, he kind of has a little discussion there after the persecution bit. And you can go read it for yourself. And there's 2 threads that come through. It's the bit where he goes and says, you're the salt of the earth, you're the light of the world. Do your good works before others so that they may see them and glorify your Father. And that whole section is kind of drawing out 2 things. On the one hand is the hostility of persecution, or really he defines it as reviling, angry disgust. And saying things falsely against you on my account. That sort of dynamic which we see in the world, there's that anger. But the other thread he works through is this rising phenomenon of the work of God in the face of that. And he's saying the work of God ultimately is that people will see the good works of my people and glorify my Father in heaven and your Father in heaven. But the means by which that is to happen is through these 2 metaphors, salt and light. That's what we're called to in the face of rising hostility, is to be salt and to be light. And I want to say this, the salt, he says, don't let the salt lose its taste, because then it's useless. You say, well, how would the salt lose its taste? It loses its taste when the moisture gets in, when the influence of the outside world compromises it. And that so often our impulse, when the hostility rises, when the challenges come, what can we give away? How can we change? And we do this deliberately or just naturally in order to make the pain stop. And he's saying, don't let that moisture in. Keep the integrity. And it is a call to Christian character. And it is a call to not compromise. And I want to say that for all of our doing in the world, for all of our engagement with politics, the fundamentally important thing is that our integrity as Christian believers is not compromised. And I'll say this, politics is one of those places where the threat of compromise is the strongest of anywhere. And I have sadly come across many a politician who would claim to do God's work in the passing of legislation, but their personal witness is thoroughly compromised. And that's where it starts. We must be people who do the hard work of getting sin out of our lives and who build our character in Christ and do things for and in Christ. That is so, so important. To be salt and to not let the pressure, not let our environment change us. And there's only one way to do that, I think, is through prayer and the word, and to do it all the time. Because otherwise the threat is that without even knowing it, we slowly fade and we give ourselves away, and it compromises what the salt should do, which is spread the flavour without us even, before we've even done anything, actually. Because that's the next phase when he says, and from that posture, you are the light of the world. Those of you who are mine and to show it in their lives, do your good works as light that shines. And he says, it's no good if that light is covered up. He says, actually, it should be on a stand to give light to the house. Oh no, not good enough. It should actually be like a city on a hill that cannot be hidden, so that people cannot unsee your good works. You're so ablaze with doing good that the world cannot ignore it. And it strikes me, I'm so challenged by that, because I think, what am I doing that's that obvious? What am I doing that's that committed? What am I doing that people are seeing that is that relentless in the face of hostility? Action. And there's many things you can do. And one of the things, and I'm not one of these people who says that my job is the whole kingdom of God, it's not. But one of the things you can do is be involved politically to the extent that it's available to you. That is a real opportunity to do good. And yes, hostility will come. Yes, it will. But it doesn't mean you've done wrong. Jesus says it's for righteousness' sake. But he says, you know what? The hostility might be loud and angry, but the quietness of the advance of God's kingdom continues, because people will see it and they will glorify your Father who is in heaven. And you know, ACL provides a platform for you to engage with a genuinely, thoroughly Christian organisation, and to have volunteer opportunities, to have email and campaign opportunities, to get involved in making the Christian voice heard. There's 125,000 of us, members. We're the second largest political movement in the country as far as I'm aware. We're the combined size of the Liberal and Labor parties. If that voice is properly channelled through a grassroots movement, that should have tremendous clout. And it should be clout that is for truth and for good. I'm not saying we need numbers, but we've been given numbers and we can use those. But you know, there are other things we can do, but I want to say this. We should never, and Dave touched on this, we should never say no to opportunities that come our way just because they're hard. That's not good enough. That's letting the compromise, letting the pressure of the world stop us from doing what is right. And Jesus has just said that is not the right thing to do. And I want to leave us there and say, do you know, I think God is looking in a time of moral inversion, looking in a time of change and difficulty, for those in the society who'll do what Isaiah did, which is say, here I am, send me. And to step up and be salt and light for his kingdom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martyn. Now, you can also sign up to the ACL to get their emails online, can't you?
Well, funny you should ask, Stuart. Essentially, if you want to know if there's something you can do for us, just go acl.org.au. You can do it on your smartphone right now. There's a big white field right in the centre of that homepage to put your email address in and hit sign up. It all begins there. You're on the train. You're ready to go. And there's so many opportunities. I mean, in Melbourne right now, we have 1,000 people on the streets of Melbourne knocking on doors, putting leaflets in letterbox and making phone calls in key seats where there's good Christian candidates making a stand, and where there's people who will undo the terrible work of Daniel Andrews. And I'll just say this, in exchange, I'm on video, aren't I? We went in, we obviously, we didn't do that before we offered our help to the coalition in Victoria and asked for a few things, and they gave them. So there's election commitments if Matthew Guy wins in Victoria to undo a lot of the bad stuff, and that's really significant. That kind of voice in the political square hasn't existed until now, where you actually have the electoral clout, the door knocking, the creation of swings to put people in or out of Parliament. That hasn't existed on our side of politics or on the Christian side. It just hasn't existed.
It does on the other side.
Oh, people like get up. Politicians shake in their boots when you say get up, Because every federal election, Get Up will name 5 federal politicians who they're coming for. And they'll put out a video saying, we're coming for you. And they'll be the Andrew Hasties of this world. They'll be the really, really good guys. And they usually get 3 out of 5 knocked out of Parliament. Now, that's the cost of speaking up for Christian values in Parliament right now. And that's why nobody does it. But, we need to change that paradigm. We need to say to these guys, you've got backing, you've got help. We have 1,000 people in your electorate, which we do in many, who can turn out on the streets and help you. I tell you, the power of that is tremendous, and you will see a seismic shift in politics in no time flat. But it means we've got to get on our feet. And I realise I've been preaching at people to get on their feet and do stuff, and I haven't yet done some of these things. So this week I'm actually spending the week in Melbourne door knocking myself so that I can turn around and say, leading from the front, come on guys, let's go. So
Thank you very much, Martyn.